Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are looking at a civilization whose scale is, honestly, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about a superpower that maintained over 2 millennia, 2,000 years of absolute dominance. From its early kingdom days right through the Republic to this sprawling, massive empire. At its absolute peak, literally 1 in every 5 people walking the earth was Roman. It's the society that basically gave us the blueprint for modern armies, early democracy, and of course, those architectural marvels that are incredibly still standing today.
So that brings us to the big question. How exactly does a superpower with 2,000 years of dominance finally fall? I mean, how does an empire that massive, that powerful, and that deeply rooted just collapse? Well, today's explainer is going to be a bit of a dramatic, chronological thriller. We are tracing the entire life cycle of the Roman Empire. We'll start from a tiny little settlement by a river, watch it become a world-dominating superpower, and finally witness its totally chaotic and fragmented demise.
And you know what's really wild? It's how alive Rome still is right now. Like, if you've paid any attention to the news lately, you've used Roman concepts. Our modern political systems, our everyday vocabulary, they were directly founded by these guys. Words like republic, dictator, senate, veto, the whole shebang was coined during Rome's political experiments centuries and centuries ago.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. First, origins, myth, and reality. Second, the rise of the Republic. Third, the era of Julius Caesar. Number 4, going from Republic to the Empire. 5, the madness and golden ages. And finally 6, the fall of Rome. Let's get right into it.
Number 1. Origins, myth, and reality.
Let's start at the very beginning. So between 600 and 510 BC, Rome was actually ruled by a series of 7 kings, which ended with this brutal tyrant known as Tarquin the Proud. But when we look at how this all literally began, we have to kind of separate the facts from the fiction. On one hand, Roman historians cooked up this legendary origin story. You've probably heard it. Twin brothers Romulus and Remus abandoned in a river, raised by a wolf, who eventually fought until Romulus killed his brother and named the city after himself. Classic myth stuff. But modern archaeological research tells a much more grounded story. The historical reality is that around 625 BC, scattered villages in the region basically just united for protection. They formed a small trading center right there on the banks of the Tiber River.
Section 2. Rise of the Republic.
Okay, so that small trading center, it eventually grew. And in 509 BC, after the citizens finally overthrew that tyrannical king, Tarquin the Proud, Rome birthed the world's most famous republic. The absolutely crucial point here is how they actually structured this new government. So the Senate was divided into 2 very distinct classes. On one side, you had the patricians. These were the wealthy, powerful elite. And on the other, the plebeians, basically the everyday middle class. Now, these groups elected 2 leaders called consuls. But because the patricians hoarded all the power and constantly misused it, it created massive, massive friction. It's this profound early echo of class conflict, right? And it's going to bring intense political instability to the Republic for centuries.
But despite all that internal strife, the Republic expanded massively. This led to the infamous Punic Wars against Carthage, which was the super powerful city-state in North Africa. Over 3 brutal wars, Rome really asserted its dominance. And in that final conflict, Rome didn't just defeat Carthage. No, they literally burned the city to the ground, killing hundreds of thousands and enslaving everyone else. With the Western Mediterranean completely locked down, Rome looked east, expanding into Macedonia. And this is a huge turning point, because this is where they absorbed Greek architecture, religion, and philosophy, which fundamentally rewired Roman society forever. Moving on to part 3, Era of Julius Caesar. So by 100 BC, Rome was this undisputed superpower. But massive territorial expansion brought massive inequality. Leaders who actually advocated for the poor, they were repeatedly assassinated, which plunged the Republic straight into civil war. And you know how it goes. In times of extreme chaos, people often turn to dictatorial figures. Enter Julius Caesar in 58 BC. He was tasked with conquering Gaul, which is modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. But those Gallic tribes, they were fiercely independent. According to historical biographers, Caesar's forces fought against an astonishing 3 million Gauls in this unbelievably grueling 6-year campaign.
The human cost of this was just staggering. 1 million Gauls were killed. Another 1 million were enslaved. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying duality of Rome. Brutal, ruthless conquest abroad translated directly to immense political popularity back home. Caesar's victory made him an absolute, unstoppable force in the eyes of the Roman public.
Naturally, the Senate was absolutely terrified of Caesar's rising power, so they ordered him to step down. But instead, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River with his army. He then formed the First Triumvirate, which was this massive political alliance with two other heavy-hitter generals, Pompey and Crassus. Together, they basically hacked the Roman political system. But alliances born of ambition rarely last, do they? Crassus was killed in battle, supposedly having molten gold poured down his throat, and Pompey turned against Caesar. This sparked a civil war that Caesar decisively won, basically crowning himself dictator for life.
And all of this tension built up to one of the most famous moments in all of human history. See, Caesar enacted progressive reforms. He built roads, and he became so wildly popular he was viewed almost as a demigod. But those senators who dreamed of restoring the old republic, they just saw a tyrant. So on March 15, 44 BC, under the guise of presenting a petition, a group of senators surrounded Caesar and stabbed him 23 times.
Amidst that horrific attack, Caesar looked up to see his close ally, a man he literally considered a son, Marcus Junius Brutus, holding a dagger. His legendary last words, "It too, Brutes," or "And you, Brutus," they perfectly symbolize the ultimate betrayal. The assassins, they actually thought they were saving the Republic, but man, did they miscalculate. The public was outraged, and Caesar's death immediately plunged Rome right back into another bloody civil war.
Part 4. Republic to the Empire.
From the ashes of this civil war rose Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. Now, he initially teamed up with Mark Antony to defeat the assassins, but pretty soon they turned on each other. Mark Antony allied with and fell in love with Cleopatra in the east. Octavian, meanwhile, launched this brilliant propaganda campaign, culminating in the massive naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavian completely crushed their fleet, leading Antony and Cleopatra to die by suicide. With his rivals finally gone, Octavian was declared the very first emperor of Rome, changing his name to Augustus. And surprisingly, he was exactly what Rome needed. He ruled for 41 years, introduced progressive laws, focused on architecture, and finally ended that endless cycle of civil wars. He kicked off an era known as the Pax Romana, a 200-year period of relative peace and stability. Actually, the month of August is still named after him today.
Section 5. Madness and Golden Ages.
But, as the saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The emperors that followed Augustus were a wildly mixed bag. You had Caligula, a notoriously cruel and paranoid ruler who was eventually assassinated in an underground passage. He was followed by his uncle Claudius, who was, get this, poisoned by his own wife so her son could take the throne. And that son, that was Nero, who took power at just 16 years old. Nero's reign was an absolute nightmare. He assassinated his own mother, bankrupted the treasury, and killed anyone who even looked at him funny. When a great fire devastated Rome, the famous quote says Nero fiddled while Rome burned, and that he blamed the Christians for the disaster. But actually, we need to be objective here. The fiddle wasn't even invented until 1,000 years later. So that famous quote, very likely a historical smear campaign manufactured by his political enemies. Though the devastating fire and his subsequent suicide were very, very real.
Roman leadership was basically a total roller coaster. Just look at the year 69 AD, literally known as the Year of the Four Emperors. It was utter chaos. You had Otho, who tragically took his own life rather than see his soldiers slaughtered. He was followed by Vitellius, a sociopathic dictator who was dragged through the streets and executed. But then, you contrast all that madness with the era of good emperors. Leaders like Trajan, who expanded the empire to its absolute peak and built roads that literally define Europe's transport maps today. Or Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who was out there writing a Stoic manifesto, Meditations, while actively commanding armies. Which brings us to Section 6, the Fall of Rome. Unfortunately, after Marcus Aurelius died, the Pax Romana died with him. Rome spiraled into a 100-year period of sheer, unadulterated chaos. Over 25 emperors took power, and almost all of them were assassinated. The Praetorian Guard even murdered one emperor and quite literally auctioned off the throne to the highest bidder. The instability got so severe that one guy, Emperor Gordian II, managed to hold on to power for exactly 22 days. By 285 AD, the empire was just too massive to manage, so Emperor Diocletian attempted this drastic administrative fix. He instituted the Tetrarchy. Step 1. He split the empire right down the middle, creating a western and an eastern half. Step 2. He appointed a senior leader, an Augustus, for each side.
And step 3, each Augustus got a junior deputy, a Caesar. It was a desperate attempt to delegate power and stabilize the borders.
But this division pretty much sealed Rome's fate. After Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity and briefly united the empire under a new religion, the final permanent split happened. The Greek-speaking East, which eventually became the Byzantine Empire, grew incredibly rich and heavily fortified its capital. Meanwhile, the Latin-speaking Western Empire fell into a brutal economic depression. Because the East was just too strong, invading Germanic tribes like the Goths and the Vandals, they turned all their attention to the weakened, impoverished West, repeatedly sacking the city.
And that brings us to the end. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire was completely broken. It was conquered by a Germanic general, and the very last Roman emperor was sent into exile. And guys, there is a profound, almost unbelievable poetic irony here. Think about it. The legendary founder and first king of Rome was named Romulus. The very first emperor was Augustus, and the final, defeated emperor, whose exile marked the literal death of the Western Roman Empire, his name was Romulus Augustulus. You honestly can't write it better than that. This history is incredibly relevant to us right now. We've seen how extreme political division, vast economic inequality, the corruption of elites, and endless civil conflicts brought down a civilization that lasted over 2 millennia. As you look at the systems, the vocabulary, and the politics we inherited from them, it leaves us with one vital question. If the ultimate superpower could collapse from internal division and corruption, what lessons from ancient Rome are we ignoring today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope it gave you a clear visual understanding of this massive slice of human history.